Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. For those of you that like to get to the juicy story where you have the straightforward Bigfoot encounter, well, I've got that for you on this channel right now. But the full stories are really worth listening to, and I've got them listed at the bottom, because really, just the Bigfoot encounter without the whole experience from the beginning to the middle and the end is really worth listening to. But if you just want to get to the juicy encounter that people have sent in to me, by all means, here are a few examples of them right now on my channel. So get straight into the business, shall we? And let's get started. Devon threw a couple of acorns at the tent, and imagine our surprise when a hairy monster came crawling out of the tent, and he rose up on 2 feet like a human being. But this extraordinary-looking creature was most certainly not human. But what was he? We couldn't even imagine. In all our young lives, we had never seen or heard of a creature like this, even existing in North America of all places. I think all 4 of us stared at this creature in stupefied horror, just so bedazzled by the hairy critter that none of us moved a muscle. We were seemingly frozen to the spot, but thankfully well hidden from his sight. One thing is for sure, we had never encountered a monster like this before, and we were clueless as to what on earth this strange creature actually was. I know I was younger at the time and shorter than I am now, but I would estimate that this hairy creature was about 8 feet tall, 700 pounds, and 4 feet wide, but I cannot be certain of those facts. What I do know was that this strapping, thick-set creature was in no uncertain terms absolutely colossal, hefty and incredibly burly. He was covered from head to toe with long, shaggy auburn hair that had Spanish moss growing in some parts of his fur, which I remember thinking was extraordinarily strange, as I've never seen moss growing on an animal before like this. He had the most massive shoulders that I've ever seen, and a soccer ball-shaped head with a very long face. I could tell that the peachy-brown coloured skin was of a leathery texture and was really quite shiny. The creature had a prominent brow ridge that was heavily wrinkled, a very flat nose with pink nostrils, slender mouth, and what I can only describe as very rusty-coloured brown eyes. One thing that really got my attention was the well-defined muscle mass, because the creature was powerfully strong, very lean and exceedingly muscular. I remember thinking that my father, who was an aspiring lightweight boxer at the time, would have killed to have muscles like this creature possessed. I also thought that it would not be hard for this animal to pick up a whole car in his arms if he wanted to, because he was without question powerful, strong, athletic, agile and majestic. When I say animal, I do think I do the creature a disservice describing him like that, because he was more like a giant man with a few ape-like influences to his appearance, which were clearly notable in his overlong arms, so typical of the ape-like species. I'm sure this creature could have run as easily on all 4s as on 2 legs, because he looked as if he was proficient in both, as when he emerged from the tent he did so with such fluidness and grace that even a ballerina would envy his perfect, seamless coordination, agility and balance. As the strange hairy humanoid ape came out of the tent, he wore a very perplexed expression on his face, and he picked up the 2 acorns that Devon had thrown. He inspected and examined the acorns very closely, and then proceeded to look up at the oak tree, as if he was expecting to see a squirrel vamoosing away on its little legs, as he possibly assumed that the little form accidentally dropped the acorn on the tent. When he did not detect the hairy offender, he quite literally shrugged his shoulders like a human would, scratched his head looking ever so slightly bewildered, and then he grunted to himself with a somewhat confused, baffled and muddled expression on his face, almost as he could not work out who had actually thrown the acorns at the tent. He shook his head from side to side, swaying like a tree in the breeze, and then got down on all his 4s, forging ahead as he launched himself and his Goliath-sized body into the tent, that seemed too tiny for his gargantuan proportions. As he moved around in the tent, it began to wobble and vibrate. We could see the tent moving as he moved. Suddenly we saw these clothes flying out of the tent, landing in bedraggled heaps on the ground, resembling a kiddie's messy bedroom, or the closet after it's been ransacked and raided when you're looking for a lost item of clothing that you want to wear for a party. Eventually the creature climbed out of the tent and started examining all the clothes. He would place them against his figure and heave a huge sigh of disappointment
as he tossed the clothes to one side. It was like he was at a jumble sale, desperately finding an item he wanted to buy. He was acting like that. Unfortunately, everything he placed against his huge physique looked like doll's clothes against his jumbo-sized anatomy. Suddenly, I think we all realised he was looking for something to put on or wear, but judging by his massive girth, nothing was ever going to fit him. He was really so funny to watch that we were all starting to giggle, and it was tough to suppress our laughter because the creature was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. He kept making these hilarious, disappointed expressions as he began to realise that everything he put against his body was simply far too small for him to wear. I imagine he'd seen human clothes before and wanted to try wearing something himself, much like we would try on a gorilla costume for fun. I think the poor critter was gutted that he was simply way too big for everything. The creature rifled through all the clothes, and then he found a monstrously, and when I say monstrously, I'm meaning monstrously huge pair of male underpants, such as a size I've never even seen before, that were so oversized, which he began to examine very closely in his hands. He twirled them around his sausage-sized hands, as if trying to decide what they actually were. Once again he scrutinized the underpants with a very perplexed, confused look on his face. Quite suddenly his rusty brown eyes brightened as a brilliant idea seemed to surface in his mind, as if he'd found the answer and solution which was now so blatantly obvious to him. It was like he had had a very clear revelation of what the underpants' purposes actually were. I think he believed they were a hat of some kind. He then proceeded to pop the underpants on his large conical-sized head, and suddenly he seemed terribly pleased with himself because he had found something he could actually wear, and it wasn't a bad fit at all. The jubilant, euphoric, gleeful expression on his face was undeniable. He was ecstatic. He had found something potentially wearable. He let out a couple of delighted, joyful whoops and scratched his chest proudly, as I sensed he really believed that he looked marvellously fetching. Then he just glided away on his long legs, still adorned in his underpant hat that looked so ridiculously we were literally wetting ourselves from laughing so much. As seeing an ape with an underpant hat with 2 gaping leg holes is a hilarious sight to behold, if I ever did see one. What was funnier still is I think the creature really believed he looked prepossessing and exceedingly handsome. The fabulous fool was stunned, and we all stared at each other in absolute horror. "What the heck was that?" said Devon, laughing. "The thing was so funny. He's wearing underpants like a hat." We all cracked up laughing, and then I silenced everyone, "Shh," as we heard footsteps coming into the woods. "Be quiet, someone's coming." It was Peepers Creepers himself, I was certain of that. As he got close to his tent, I heard him say, "What the hell? Not again! That stupid ape keeps stealing all my stuff and trying on all my clothes. When is that silly critter ever going to realise he's way too big to fit into any of my stuff?" To cut a long story short, we all went home to our parents to tell them about everything that had transpired. They believed our story, minus of course the ape-man part, because as you well know, it's very hard to get people to believe in the hairy, ape-like humanoid. We were lucky that we were children at the time when we told everyone about the hairy creature, so that the adults just dismissed our encounter as fictitious and comical joke on our parts. As we got older, we kept our lips tightly shut for fear of ridicule, because we knew no one would ever believe our story.
So there we are. That's the juicy bits of our stories tonight. I personally think you should go back and listen to the whole story because it makes it so much more exciting, because then you learn all about where it happened, the location, and all about the fabulous characters involved in the story, and that makes the story so much more gripping. But as I say, so go down to the description and then click on to the YouTube link, and then you will hear the whole story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.